can do to recruit and retain diverse faculty and staff during COVID-19. We know that recruitment and retention of diverse faculty and staff is already a major issue, but how can we address these specific challenges in the age of the coronavirus? We invite you to get in on the discussion. As Wendy mentioned, there's a Q&A button on your screen, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible. I'd also like to invite you to tweet about this session at Diverse Issues. We have an exceptional panel of experts joining us today. Please welcome Andy Brantley, President and CEO of the College and University Professional Association for Human Resources, Dr. Minna Pratt-Clark, Vice President for Strategic Affairs and Diversity, and a Professor of Education at Virginia Tech, and Dr. Zulema Valdez, Associate Vice Provost for the Faculty and a Professor of Sociology at the University of California, Merced. I'm happy that each of you are here, and I want to start off with asking each of you to assess the situation we are in and to contextualize your work and approach to this issue, particularly as it relates to recruitment and retention. We'll start with Mr. Brantley.
Thank you, Jamal. First, it's great to be with you today. I'd like to start by thanking each and every one of you for the incredible work that you have done during the last several weeks. Your efforts to transition campus operations and your ongoing work to lead and support your campuses have been and continue to be absolutely extraordinary. This virus could forever change how higher education operates, including the duties and responsibilities of employees and the positions needed to manage campus workforces that are much more diverse than any other employers across the country. You and your managers have made unprecedented changes to work assignments and work processes. Definitions of things like essential and non-essential and reserve employees that worked for years as we closed due to ice, snow, storms, etc., no longer suffice to help you meet the challenges of your campus and work with employees, many of whom are rightly fearful for their health and safety. We also know that during the next few weeks, we'll be making more changes next months as we work with telecommuting employees who attempt to complete job duties while caring for children who cannot go to daycare, teaching their children who must now be homeschooled, and addressing the many other challenges created by this crisis. How we manage the ongoing work that requires a physical presence on campus also will continue to evolve and change. Many of you are now also facing the very difficult decisions regarding layoffs and furloughs and beginning to plan how we begin to bring some of our employees back to campus in their on-campus roles over the next weeks and months in what could be a very different environment. I've talked with several leaders around the country who are involved in scenario planning now as to what that might look like into the next months as we move back into the fall. So many unknowns as we make plans. I'm very pleased to be here with you today and really look forward to our conversation. Thank you, Jamal.
Thank you, Dr. Pratt-Clark.
Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about the work that we're doing here at Virginia Tech, but also the work that I think about. I consider myself a scholar of issues of race, class, and gender, and situate my practice at Virginia Tech as the Vice President for Strategic Affairs and Diversity around my sort of academic scholarly background. And so in the midst of this, the work I do here at Virginia Tech is leading both strategic affairs and diversity. And so it's a very interesting opportunity for me to use two lenses and to think about the intersection of strategic planning and visioning for the future of a university that is very different now than when we started this process almost 18 months ago, and to think about how we continue to advance diversity and inclusion efforts. I think it's important to understand that diversity work has to continue, and the way in which we do our work as an institution, how we continue to advance diversity has to shift in light of today's current context. And this conversation, I hope, is an opportunity for all of us to think together about some creative strategies for continuing to advance the mission of our institutions broadly, but even more specifically, the mission of inclusion and diversity within that context.
Thank you, Dr. Pratt-Clark. And certainly you mentioned we want to be outcomes based. So we want to think about, again, some solutions as we're moving forward. So I appreciate that. Dr. Valdez, welcome.
Yes, hi, thanks. It's wonderful to be here today, and along with my esteemed colleagues. We are here together, even though we are probably all of us alone separately in some capacity or the other. We may or may not be wearing sweatpants. I don't think we have to reveal that today. But I do think that the challenges that we're facing are serious. There's no reason to think that they're going to let up in the near term, and even may have effects for what happens in the future with respect to higher ed practices. So this conversation is just the beginning of a larger discussion that we have to have about, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to reconfigure what we're doing and take it into the future? With respect to my role as Associate Vice Provost for the faculty, I'm particularly interested in retaining faculty of color and recruiting faculty of color, as well as being really inclusive with respect to lots of different protected categories, and just really diversifying the faculty so that they look more like our student populations. And we need to be attentive to that, even in this really challenging circumstances. A lot of searches right now, as we all know, are being stopped. Some, if you're lucky, are ongoing. Universities seem to be making commitments to searches that are in progress now, but there's no certainty about what might happen in the future. We also have a wonderful graduate student body that is graduating and will be on the job market in these conditions. So on the one hand, I think it's really challenging. The economic uncertainty has to be creating so much anxiety out there. And at the same time, I think there's a real opportunity for the universities that are continuing to conduct their searches. For one thing, there should be no reason why those search committees can't put together really diverse pools and take that all the way through, because there's going to be a need for those faculty members to get jobs. And we need to be looking creatively at trying to recruit the most diverse pools ever, given these circumstances that we're currently in.
So let's start. I'm sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Great. I was just about to say we need to think about whether we're going to keep the playbook as is or throw it out and do something else.
Yeah. So let's start there if we can, Dr. Valdez, and I'll start with you, and then we'll kind of work our way around. Because you talked about us needing to think more creatively about how to, again, recruit and retain, particularly faculty of color. And we know that this, again, is always a challenge. But can you offer some suggestions on how we do this, particularly during this period that we're in?
Yes. So one of the things that I think is so critical is that there has to be a cultural shift in thinking about diversity as bringing in creativity and excellence in universities. And in doing so, that means that we need to have administrative support all the way at the top from the provost level on down. But we also need to talk to our faculty members and our colleagues in our own departments. I find that sometimes in my position, what's been really interesting is where are the gaps in thinking about diversity as a value, as a thing that contributes not only to our university, but what are we doing here as faculty members? We're not just serving our particular units or departments. We're serving a larger context, the university setting. We're often situated, in particular at UC Merced, we're situated in a very low resource community in the Central Valley. It is rife with unemployment. These are challenges that we've always had. Limited kinds of human capital that folks can get jobs in. We need to be thinking about how are we not only serving our department, how are we serving our student population, and what is the contribution that we're bringing to the larger community, the Merced County community, the Central Valley community. And so what we like to do here is we like to think about, well, what does diversity look that could contribute to those different areas, right? Not just in the department, but beyond. And when you start thinking about one of the goals of what we're trying to achieve is not just for our university, but it's larger than that, then we can start to say like, wow, okay, let's think about that. we have a student body that's 60% first generation, 60% minority, 60% working class in a Central Valley, which is a very low resource community. What kinds of diversity, right, would we bring in that would really affect change in this context? And I think that gets a different kind of conversation going. The other thing is that the standard best practices are always a good idea. We have faculty equity advisors that train our search committees. We have the faculty equity advisors advising the deans and the chairs on what the pool is looking like. And if it starts to look like it's not very diverse, we will recommend creative things. So right now, we can't go to conferences and show up in people's panels and ask them to apply, but we could send out our job ads into individuals within areas. Like, so for example, the Ford Foundation has a really vibrant listserv. You can send it out there, and you can send it out to 20 people on that listserv that you know personally and ask folks for recommendations. There's also Facebook groups that can be used with great effect.
And you can also advertise the diverse issues in higher education as well.
Of course.
Dr. Frank Clark, what's your take on this?
Well, my take is that the work of inclusion and diversity can't just happen overnight. And so if institutions have not been working for a while to build a solid foundation, it's going to be hard in the midst of this current climate to jumpstart some new initiatives. So I think at Virginia Tech, we've been fortunate enough that, we've had probably at least 20 years of trying to build a foundation that we've accelerated that work in the last 4 years. And so Inclusive VT, which is our institutional and individual commitment to our motto, Ut Prosim, that I may serve, in the spirit of community, diversity, and excellence, has provided that foundation for us. And so the number one priority for Inclusive VT has been to be able to create sustainable institutional transformation. And it's that mindset of having structures, policies, practices, and procedures as part of the culture that enables institutions to shift when a new shift has come. So one of the programs that I'm hoping we will still continue to use, which has been in place for about 10 years at Virginia Tech, is called the Future Faculty Development Program, Future Faculty Diversity Development Program. We put a call out for talent, have close to 200-300 applications from scholars, vet that program down to about 40 or 50 or so scholars, and we brought them on campus last year. This year, if we're not able to bring them on campus, I think we're all mastering this technology that we're using today to create a virtual experience. And I mean, for example, my virtual background is Roanoke, Virginia. That's a partner with us in Blacksburg. And so I think we're all trying to figure out how do we use this technology to showcase our campus, to continue to recruit talent. I think we all don't know if we're going to be hiring in the fall, but there's always talent identification. And I think this is an opportunity to identify that talent, to form relationships with that talent. And when those opportunities come up, which they will eventually, that the relationship has already been formed to be able to move on the possible opportunity for an offer and continuing to engage. I think the other piece I just want to briefly mention is the importance of retention. Being able to retain your existing talent and continuing to reach out to them and check in on them and just see how's it going is as equally important as trying to recruit new talent.
Unmute.
Hello?
There you
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I love the idea, I'm sorry, of cultivating relationships over a period of time. I think that's critical. Dr. Valdez, did you want to say anything before I go to Mr. Brantley?
No, I think she's exactly right. And we do need to, a cultural shift takes years, and it takes a commitment from all levels, right? All the way up. I don't think that a top-down strategy works necessarily or a bottom-up. It really has to be coming from both, and it has to kind of permeate what we're trying to do.
Okay, great. Andy, Mr. Brantley.
So one of the things that, and please call me Andy, one of the things that I think is so critically important about this conversation is that we know, and we know who these colleagues are on campus right now that will say, well, we're not hiring, or we have limited hiring. So, we're committed to diversity and inclusion, but that's not at the top of our list. And one of the things that Zlima said that I think is so critically important is this is, and I'm going to quote her exactly, building community and supporting community. So it's not, these aren't tangents. These aren't, they don't live in isolation. So I think if we're not careful, people will hone in on just that recruitment piece and not this whole, the importance of all these things that we're going through right now and the opportunity to build and support community in so many ways. And to, whether that means making sure that we have a very diverse pool for the 1 or 2 positions that we're able to fill, and not allowing there to be excuses for not having a diverse pool, but also those other things that we're doing, not just in terms of retention, but in terms of our commitment to each other and what that looks like and what that feels like every day.
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in just for a minute
Yes,
and
please.
go back to something Andy just mentioned, is that when colleagues say, I'm committed to diversity and inclusion, but
But
shifts the conversation. So it has to be, I'm committed to diversity, inclusion, and then we can figure out how to navigate whatever tensions. There could be fiscal tensions that inform that reality, but it shifts the conversation from a but to an and.
Yeah. Given that this is new terrain that we are navigating in terms of the new normal, what are some best practices I think that search committees, institutions can employ using kind of this virtual platform, particularly as a way of reaching out to candidates and also even doing the interview process? Can any of you share some of that, in terms of your thinking?
I can start.
Okay.
So one thing, and someone asked me about this the other day, and if you think about the abrupt way that all of this came about, one of the things that I shared with a group is that communicate with those applicants who are just hanging out there.
Yeah.
So what is the status of the search? Even if you don't know what the outcomes are going to be, communicating to those applicants that you don't know and that you promise to be back in touch as quickly as possible is critically important, because I guarantee that there are many searches out there that they're just kind of stalled and their candidates don't have a clue what's going on. So first, communicate. I think the second thing to keep in mind is that most of us were already doing some sort of Zoom interviews or something similar beforehand. It was surprising to me the number that still were not, and were bringing ridiculous numbers of candidates to campus and paying all the expenses to do that. But one of the things to keep in mind when we're doing interviews like that is that we need to work with our search committees in terms of clarity with regard to the competencies and skills that are needed for those positions, and also being really clear that they are there to evaluate that candidate's experience, not what may or may not be going on in the background of that candidate. Not every candidate is of privilege that has the technology that the 4 of us have here, or a nice space where they can get away for a quiet whatever without kids running by or a dog running by or whatever. So it's honing in on the reality of the circumstances that we're in now, and having search committees really focus on the things that are most important with those candidates. There's a lot more I could share, but I want to turn it to my colleagues for their thoughts.
No, that's a good start. Dr. Pratt Clark?
Yeah, I actually think this is a little bit of a complementary perspective to Andy's. But I think right now, everybody's so busy, just getting your campus colleagues to show up for the interview. Sometimes it was hard when it was in person, but there would be a lunch or a meal or something that kind of motivated people to show up in their busy schedules. And I think now when you have maybe days full of Zoom meetings and you're trying to prioritize, it's easy to say, I just can't do an interview. And I think that work of, because you're not just introducing the candidate to your search committee, they might have already had some interaction with the search committee. It's the entire campus community, or those colleagues they're going to be working with, or the colleagues that there is as much of that candidate interviewing you as an institution as you interviewing that candidate. And if you had a list of 10 people they were supposed to see in each afternoon session, 1 or 2 people is showing up, people have some sense, and we know everybody's busy, but it speaks a lot to the investment of the institution in that candidate, in that position. And so I think the work of trying to just get your campus colleagues to show up for the searches that you're still trying to run, even now with the few searches that are continuing, and they are very few, they've been deemed essential or critical for the particular mission or department or program, is really getting your campus colleagues to show up.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Valdez?
Yeah, so my comments are also related to theirs. I'll just speak to a couple of other of the issues that I think are related. One of the issues is about equity. And frankly, if you had a search that was going on and a couple of folks came to campus and now you're going to try to salvage that search, but now you're going to go to Zoom for the rest, you really have to have a conversation with your search committee that's really frank about equity, because having a Zoom conference and interview process is very, very different than a face-to-face with the lunches and the dinners that may have existed for other candidates. And so that's something that really needs to be at the foremost. You have to have at least a discussion about what that's going to look like and how you're going to evaluate candidates who might be on different platforms. That said, if you haven't launched a search yet, you have an opportunity to actually do more interviews than you might have otherwise, because one of the things about limiting it to 3 to 5 candidates to come to a campus is the expense of the travel. And now you don't have that. And so it also gives you an opportunity to have a much more diverse short list. Because now, instead of interviewing 3 candidates or 5 candidates, you actually could interview 8 candidates or 10 candidates. And in having those Zoom one day with some breaks in between, I would also recommend having a host. So you have like the chair of the search committee or the chair of your department is hosting it, so they're in background just in case there's any other problems. You should use the waiting room to give the person a break. But if you just do that and say, and also what we did, we sent out tips to how to look good on the Zoom, right? Those kinds of things. So we're trying to help make sure that everyone has a fighting chance to have the right lighting. And so those things I think are really critical. And then, so having more Zooms actually gives you more chances to have a diverse pool. And then the last thing I would say is, if you haven't sent out your advertisement, you might also want to think about, are we doing something in terms of a very narrowly focused ad? For some units in the social sciences or humanities, having a really narrowly focused ad that's looking for a very specific position is a way to actually generate more diversity. But in something in, say, in the natural sciences, having a more narrowly focused ad might actually have the opposite effect. And so there's a consideration of maybe widening that search really broadly in some of the natural sciences or the engineering searches, but then having a really kind of narrowly focused one for social sciences and humanities.
Interesting. I'm thinking about all of the possibilities and opportunities actually that this has now created for us. And I'm also thinking about things like job talks and how that might look using this kind of either Zoom feature or virtual campus. Can anybody talk about that? I guess it would be not different from an interview process, right? If someone gave a job talk using this platform.
Yeah, I think that is a possibility. I think that the other thing, and I was going to interject related to this conversation that builds on what you just said and my other colleagues, is this also an opportunity to step back and evaluate how we do search? So, for example, do we need to still have the full day of parading them through, 300 people when that might not necessarily be the best approach? And maybe this is an opportunity to rethink that and how we characterize search overall, because no one does search like higher ed does search. And so, like with so many other things that we've considered recently with all the changes, maybe this is an opportunity to rethink that. Who needs to be in the room? And with technology, you could potentially have a lot more people in the room at the same time as part of the process too. So I also throw that out there as something for us to consider as part of our processes. And with limited positions available, we can't take 6-8 months to hire people now. So if the position's available and we have the authority to move, then the longer we take, the greater likelihood is that we might lose that position to other just as important needs on campus.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the prognosis. I know it's still very early, but are you all very concerned about the fiscal sort of status and impact of institutions moving forward? I know that you all mentioned the uncertainty that exists, but is this something that, you know, higher ed is really grappling with? Are you optimistic that things could turn around, or is it just too early to know for sure?
I guess I can share from where I sit. So I'm part of the senior leadership team here at Virginia Tech, and we've been meeting multiple times, multiple work groups. So I think one interesting thing, more of a philosophical on the other side, is how did institutions mobilize and structure themselves? Because
Yes.
there are so many different levels of issues. I mean, from the workforce side to the fiscal side, to the student affairs and dining side, to the faculty curriculum side. I mean, there are multiple levels of planning that are involved and the coordination amongst those, and everything is related. And so you shift one thing and you have these domino effects. And so which group needs to work at which time? How do you communicate amongst the groups? And then how do you communicate to your larger communities? Communities not just on the campus of faculty, staff, and students, but also the community in which the university sits or resides. And so I think, yes, I think everybody's concerned about the financial impact. The minute most institutions had to send their students home, had to start thinking about refunds of housing and dining, not having those operations. Many of them are auxiliary operations, and thinking about, you know, what's the summer look like? And these summer programs are usually just robust. They're not just for undergraduate or graduate students, but community summer camps and summer programs. And so there's no doubt that the fiscal impact of the current reality is a conversation. And I think the most scary component is that universities' budgets are largely people.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's people who we hire to work with our students, to teach them, to educate them, to expose them to a world. And so if there's budget cuts or conversations about the fiscal possibilities of an institution, it's people. And whether you continue and whether you need to have the same workforce if everything is going online in some way, or whether you need to have the same very large programming budget if every program is going to be through Zoom and have, you know, a smaller impact. So I think the fiscal reality, and when you have to make a decision, the time frame for the deliberative process of an institution has become so tight because so many decisions have to be made so quickly. So I think it's a very delicate dance that institutions are trying to do right now.
Yeah. Dr. Valdez, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think that background is exactly the kinds of situations that we're grappling with as well. One of the questions that we get a lot from faculty coming into the vice provost for the faculty office is, are we going to be teaching in the fall on campus? And this is a really important issue, because on the one hand, you don't want to make a decision about what's going to happen so soon when something can change pretty drastically. But at the same time, when you don't make that decision, when you don't pull the trigger, you're also keeping faculty who are trying to decide whether or not they should come up with a completely new curriculum for online courses, or if they should try to prep a new class, especially for the assistant professors who might be prepping a new class. Are they prepping two classes, one for the online version and one for the on-campus version? These are very different kinds of concerns for the faculty, and they want to know sooner rather than later. And so even though I understand the desire to kind of hold off until we get more information, we're putting our faculty in an untenable situation by not making that decision and just kind of sticking to it. So as a faculty advocate, which I consider myself, I do have the ear of the university and the administration, and I do try to make that clear to them. The other thing that I know that people are doing is they're kind of trying to hash out multiple scenarios, and I don't know how you go forward without having multiple scenarios about what could be happening. Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to know what the worst case scenario is and the best case scenario is, and then it would be good if they could communicate that to some degree to faculty and staff who are also holding on and just waiting to hear, as well as students. And we've heard of students already who've said, why do I want to pay for a dorm? Right? Why do I want to pay for tuition here? I can go to my community college, take my first couple of years, and then come back to a more expensive university. Those conversations are happening. We may have already lost, right? It's not whether or not there's going to be a decline in enrollment. It's how big the decline is going to be and for how long. On the other hand, students want the campus experience. So if things improve, students will come back. It might be in a different form. We really don't know. And so I think the other thing I would say is administrators are in the same situation that we are, and they don't actually know any more than we do about what's going to happen. And so one of the things I've seen too is this kind of rush to, where this is what's going to happen. And then a few days later, they have to walk that back. I mean, one of the things we saw was some pretty inelegant communication streams, right? As people were kind of like saying and proposing announcements, making announcements, and then taking them back and then shuffling them around and then resending them out. And then some people were getting them. So multiple communication streams are really important, right? Not just one centralized, but having it being pushed out by the VPF office or the grad division office or the student affairs office, and they can be pushing out things too. But also, it's okay to say we don't quite know what's going to happen. And I actually appreciate when folks say, we just don't know, we're waiting to find out. And then in the meanwhile, they got 3 or 4 scenarios that they're trying to play out.
Yeah, no, that's important. Andy?
Yeah, so there's so much I want to say, but I'll try to limit it to 3 things. One of the things, and Zalima just said this, communicate. I said that before. Even when you don't have anything to communicate that you don't have anything to communicate. Marie Williams, who's the Chief HR Officer at NC State University and the Chair of the COOP HR Board, said, when I was talking with her a couple of weeks ago, she said, one of the things, particularly in HR, that we're used to functioning in is this area of the gray. As it relates to how we manage campuses and how we work with human beings across our campus, managing the gray. But we have to be even more comfortable with that now. And part of, to Zalima's point, part of that is being willing to say to the community, this is the information that we have, we're making this decision today. Knowing that 48 hours later, the world could turn upside down again, and you need to pull back on part of that or part of that. But being clear about the communications and what you're trying to do. And I think the other thing that I wanted to share is that we have to think of this in phases. So, the first phase was, oh my God, we're moving everything remote, and what has to remain as the essential functions on campus, what are we trying to do remote, including teaching our classes. So we did that, and we're still grappling with that. But now we're in this next phase where we're trying to figure out what this next phase looks like. It's probably going to be longer and very different. But also a key part of this is these decisions with regard to reduction in force, layoffs, and furloughs that add additional angst to all the things we're going with. But at the same time, and I thought this was going to be clear, 3 clearly distinct phases. But this third phase of this sort of movement back to campus. So the restarting of the on-campus operations and what that might look like, the scenarios that we were talking about earlier. But the thing that I found very quickly is that all 3 of these are happening at the same time.
Yes.
All 3 of these. So we're trying to do the scenario planning for the summer and the fall while dealing with these very human issues of having to tell our colleagues that their job is being eliminated or they're being laid off for a while also dealing with this whole issue of still all the residual of what it does to budgets and things like that as it relates to all the changes that we've already made. So thinking about it in phases is a great way to try to put it in my brain, but at the same time, as is typical for higher education, it's all happening at once, and there's not one scenario that we can say applies to all campuses around the country either. A small private liberal arts college in the Northeast might be experiencing something very different than UC Merced or Virginia Tech, and we have to kind of keep that in mind as we're trying to think about how all this is working and what our colleagues are grappling with around the country.
Let's shift from talking about recruitment to really the retention piece, which is, I think, so critical. And we already know in diverse issues in higher ed that we've written about the frustration that some faculty, in particular faculty of color, face at institutions, feelings of isolation and not being able to connect with others. I'm wondering, what are some of the professional activities that colleges and universities can implement during this time period to help build community, particularly among faculty and staff. Dr. Valdez, you want to start?
Sure. This is something that has been challenging because in my role, I recently, I'm a co-PI on several grants that are all about retention and creating inclusive communities.
Yes.
These are funded in part by UCOP, the University of California Office of the President has put aside, earmarked quite a bit of money for the UC campuses to try to create initiatives that are building inclusive communities on campus. And the goal there is to create a community where people don't want to leave and they feel like part of something. So we had all these beautiful initiatives that we rolled out and we're really excited about. Like, just to give you one of them, we were doing a faculty learning community, which was going to be a group of faculty who were interested in pedagogy from UC Merced, working with a group of faculty from UC Davis, our sister campus a couple of hours down the road, still in the Central Valley. And our team was going to go over there and meet with them and talk about, you know, cool stuff. And then they were going to come to our camp. That's not going to happen. It cannot happen. Another great initiative we had was a faculty mentoring network where we were putting senior faculty of color with junior faculty who were coming in new, and really having these small intimate group settings with lots of resources and activities like grant writing workshops and things like that, accountability groups. Again, we can't do those on the campus anymore. So we've had, what I did, and it was really heartening, was for this one, the faculty mentoring, I had a conversation with the 3 senior mentors, and the 3 senior women of color who wanted to do this program. We are compensating them, by the way, because we know we can't give them back their time, but at least we can give them some funds. And so I met with them and I said, listen, we can't do this. I want to know what are we thinking? How can we roll this out? They came up with a great idea. So now we're doing, instead of that, we're doing what we're calling coffee and soft accountability check-ins every day. 4 days a week, one at 8 o'clock in the morning, one at 9 o'clock in the morning. One of the senior mentors is showing up to those coffee check-ins, and anyone who's in our group that was participating can jump on the call for 1 hour in the morning. And it's been really, really nice. We get compliments about it all the time because the assistant professors will just check in. We actually literally have our coffee and we just talk about what's going on in our homes and what the struggles are. And then if we want to, if we feel like we can, we'll have one soft accountability goal, a small one, and then we'll just kind of announce it and see if we can actually do it by the end of the day. The other thing that we've done is we've launched a women of color and a people of color happy hour groups that we pushed out to faculty who identified themselves as members of underrepresented minorities. So we sent that to that listserv in particular. And we're having these these occasional happy hours that are really well attended and they're really nice and they're fun and they're creating that sense of community. And the last one I'll say is, based on that one, we've had requests for a parent group in a similar vein. And so we're launching what we're calling the Parents Pandemic Happy Hour. They're going to be meeting, and they're going to be meeting periodically over the course of the next weeks. And a faculty member who has 3 children and her spouse who also have children, so they're 2 faculty members. They're hosting it, and then they're going to find another partner team to host the next one. And those are things that we're trying to do to just keep the momentum going, and to just try as much as we can to continue to create communities. We also are establishing a retreat of a kind, and we're going to actually have Uber Eats deliver the lunch at the lunch hour for all of the different folks who are participating in the retreat. So we just have to get really creative.
Yeah, I love the creative ideas. This is wonderful. Dr. Pratt-Clark, any suggestions you have?
Sure. I'm going to go back to my comment earlier about how often it's easier to move when you've institutionalized something. And so one of the programs that we just did last week was the Faculty Women of Color in the Academy Conference. That conference has I started it 8 years ago at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and Virginia Tech has agreed to host it for the last 4 years. And the conference was going to be in person and brings together almost 400 women of color. And we had to move it online, had a very short window to do that. But last weekend, we had 350 women who
Wow.
still wanted to participate in the conference.
Mm.
And so we were able to have the presenters create on-demand virtual sessions. And so we had pre-recorded sessions that we opened up in Canvas. So we had this whole dynamic of trying to create Canvas guest accounts, which is more than a Notion, but I'll kind of skip that. But we had sort of an on-demand morning session, and then the afternoon session was live. And so we had an almost 5-hour live afternoon session for Q&A, for women to come into a community. And so the chat feature was particularly powerful for women to participate in. And so that managing the magnitude of that, and there was a 2-day, it was 2 days. So the second day was a writing retreat that we also hosted. So I think being able to still convene large groups of people in community, I think is important. The conference, and I talked about how nothing takes away that walking into a room and seeing 350 women of color. Nothing can replace that, because when you do Zoom webinars, you can't get that many people on a screen. But I think that being able to still create these virtual communities that have the sense of touch, that have the sense of community and intimacy, I think is important. And so, you know, going back to what Zalima said, I do think we're all trying to reach out in different ways, create these touch point moments, touch point opportunities for engagement. And we're going to have to continue to do that. I think the social isolating is isolating. And so how you break through that barrier of isolation to create community is particularly important.
Yeah, we're going to get to some question and answers from the audience, but before we do that, I want to sneak in one last question, and that is, I had a conversation on last Friday when we did our other webinar, talking with junior scholars, and as you all know, some institutions are moving to stopping the clock, the tenure clock, and you know, and I was wondering if you all had any insights on whether or not that was a good move, particularly as it deals with this issue of productivity and scholarship. I know that's an issue that, again, not just faculty of color grapple with, but all faculty in general. So I was just wondering if any of you had any quick thoughts about that before we move to Q&A.
I can give a quick thought.
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to say, I don't think it should be a mandatory stop, because there are some scholars who are like, I've worked very hard, I'm still being able to get done, and I want to go up when I want to go up. Right. You know, when I was supposed to go up. So I think we have to allow that flexibility. Again, if there's an existing policy that provides for, typically institutions tend to have these that allow you to request an extension of your tenure clock for a variety of reasons. And then this particular dynamic becomes one of those reasons for allowing that. And so we've had that conversation on our campus, encouraging those who would like to request that extension to do so, and others who want to sort of wait and see and feel like they might want to go up when they were originally scheduled to go up, to allow them to do that as well.
Sounds good. Let's get to questions. Considering we are dealing with COVID-19, are there any hiring incentives or bonuses to attract diverse candidates other than just teaching opportunities? Can any of you comment on that?
I am not aware of any special initiatives or programs connected to COVID-19 that would also have bonus eligibility or things like that, other than some that are related to healthcare for nurses at some of our healthcare centers and things like that, where we might see a greater likelihood of sign-on bonuses and things like that.
We have a program right now, which is the Advancing Faculty Diversity Grant, that has incentive funding. If you can bring to campus someone who's contributing to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That program, we were actually worried it was going to stop, right? Because of COVID, maybe they would pull back the money. They haven't. And so although it's not COVID related specifically, it will still be available to faculty members. And this is particularly in the STEM fields, and it's something like $150,000 that's being added to startup funds to try to recruit people to come to UC Merced.
We're in the space where we're trying to align our hiring plans with our diversity commitment. And so as we think about what positions we still might have an institutional need to hire, how we can align our commitment to diversity in our existing faculty diversity incentive programs around those potential vacancies that we might have in the fall.
Here's an interesting question. As for retention, how important is addressing pay structure, the issue of biweekly versus monthly for diverse faculty and staff, in addition to single faculty and staff? This person says, we have seen struggles for those paid monthly during this pandemic because they're not able to, buy basic necessities like food and groceries. Can any of you comment on that?
My personal opinion is that we should not be paying any of our employees monthly. We need to have a more regular pay cycle that puts money in the hands of our faculty and staff that really need that to make ends meet. For senior administrators and those like that who have been able to accumulate some degree of a cushion over time, a monthly pay period might be just fine. But for the majority of our faculty and staff, having to wait an entire month to get paid is just not the reality that most of the U.S. population lives with. So that's what I would advocate, is that we eliminate all monthly payrolls and move to at least biweekly.
So I find it, I agree with that. I have just been intrigued by how hard it is for institutions to shift anything. And so if an institution had a monthly payroll process, what it will take, I mean, things are moving a little faster out of crisis mode, but so many institutions just are not designed to be able to even do something that simple to shift to a biweekly, payroll process.
Oh, it's not simple by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. Next question, how can we change the mindset of the existing faculty when they are used to recruiting applicants based solely on excellence in their respective disciplines? So how do we take a more holistic approach in terms of the recruitment piece? Dr. Valdez?
Yeah, so what we've done at UC, and it's actually being rolled out across the whole UC system, is we're elevating a diversity statement that is required and part of the materials that candidates submit for consideration for positions, any positions. And so the portfolio that folks will submit is a teaching statement, a research statement, a service statement, and a diversity statement. And the diversity statements are required for anyone who's submitting to the UC. Now, whether or not those diversity statements, how they're looked at, how search committees use them, we are trying all kinds of different ways in which to think about that. So some of the more progressive initiatives that have been rolled out in some campuses, and this includes campuses like Berkeley and UCLA, are using the diversity statement with the research statement as a first pass. So and in fact, there was an initiative at UC Davis last year where they used the diversity statement first, and then those who kind of made it through the diversity statement process, then the package was looked at. And there is, this is a really progressive approach, but what it does is it really centers the commitment to diversity, and the diversity statements are not supposed to be out. It's insufficient to just say, "Hi, I'm a Latina, second generation." That's not it. It's what are your contributions to diversity? What have you done? What will you do? And we give tips, right? There's a lot of tips on how to write diversity statements. We also have a rubric that we use. The rubric is used for not just teaching, research, and service. There's a rubric for diversity that's used as well. And so that's a way of kind of rooting out implicit bias, right, that might exist when we say like, oh, this person's really great in their research program, but when it turns out, maybe they came to an elite school, but the publication record of somebody at a non-elite institution, there's a stronger publication record there. Those are implicit biases that can exist just from elite, non-elite, but the same thing happens with the diversity statement. So having a rubric by which we are kind of like putting it out there that's really been effective. And so that's something that I would strongly recommend that is part of the package. If you want to change the culture of your community, saying that you're only looking at teaching, research, and service is not the way to do that. Diversity has to be brought in as a fourth pillar and looked at as seriously as the rest of them.
Yeah, and that's important. What about the idea of hiring from within, meaning potential PhD students who then, defend, often we take those students, we send them all away, right? Which I never really quite understood, because again, if we talk about a pipeline issue, it seems to me we should be recruiting and building our own. But what do you all think about that as a potential opportunity to then fill the gap?
Absolutely, absolutely. If one of our calls to action is how we are recruiting students of color into the pipeline to even receive the terminal degrees so that we can consider them for positions. So, there are different cultures and different reasons that institutions have, those structures in place to not hire their own, that all could be very different, and some very good and some not very good. But for me, part of the responsibility for all of us is how we're developing that pipeline. And even if it's not for our particular institution, it's for the greater good of higher education in the United States.
Yeah. Dr. Clark?
It's some institutions, and we've done this for a while at Virginia Tech, have PhD completion programs. And so you bring a candidate who's in the final stage of completing their PhD, they get to experience the campus environment. That PhD completion fellowship can then become a postdoc fellowship. So it gives them sometimes a little bit of time to build their research portfolio or get a little bit of cushion under them before they officially can transition into a tenure track program. And I think institutions can begin to create this sort of pipeline. It's sort of a soft pipeline, because you might still there might still be a recruiting component where you're recruiting a graduate student who's not yet ready for the market. But I also think that institutions now are increasingly looking at their existing talent that they have already identified as a PhD student who's done phenomenal work, and said, why would we send this phenomenal talent off to another institution? And if I think there's always that alignment. You might want the student, they might not want you. So, if the student wants to stay, the scholar wants to stay, you as an institution want that scholar, it's a great match.
Yeah. Last question is, given the few job opportunities that may exist, particularly at the faculty level, are there any suggestions that you can offer to candidates of color as a way of distinguishing themselves for some of these positions?
One of the things I would just quickly say is this was a lesson from the faculty women of color in the Academy Conference, is that we as scholars of color don't need to give up too soon. And so we might be getting a few rejections and starting to feel like, oh, there's never a space for me, but that persistence. And so a lot of places right now, there just legitimately may not be hiring, but it doesn't prevent this importance of networking. And I think Zalima's point earlier about Facebook groups is incredibly powerful. I haven't seen it so much on LinkedIn, but I think Facebook has created these incredible communities of scholars where people will be able to share what they're looking for, talk about their expertise. Jobs are posted on Facebook. I mean, sort of identifying your networking, virtual social media networking community, keeping your information as in the face of those communities as possible, I think is particularly important. So I think it's an opportunity to start thinking about your brand and thinking about scholars you want to network with, thinking about who you need to just send a quick email to about finishing my dissertation. It's on this topic. When the opportunity comes, please think of me. So there's still so much networking work that can happen. So when those opportunities come, you might be the scholar that's on top of someone's mind, and they might be able to bring you in through a search waiver. They might not have to go and do a full out search. They might just be able to bring you on board because you've done that pre-work of networking and sustaining your community.
And if I could add, is that okay? I just want to add something. One of the things I'd like to say to graduate students is you might be able to extend your time. And it might not be a bad idea to stay an extra year. If you were in a rush to get out, you might want to stay another year if you can. Get a publication or two under your belt. Get a few chapters or your book proposal brushed off. That may be a way to do it. The other thing is consider postdocs. There's more and more postdoc opportunities out there, although postdocs are also going to take a hit. But perhaps you weren't thinking about applying for a postdoc. Maybe you should. And the other thing is, Californians don't like to leave California, just like Texans don't like to leave Texas. But I think that our California population needs to consider widening the scope of their job search.
Yeah. Andy, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, we would like to think that that our success as applicants is not linked to the connections that we make, but that is not true. It really does connect to who you know, and that has negative connotations, but I love the way that Minna just said that, because it's about how you are meaningfully connected to your community of interest as it relates to where you want to spend the rest of your career. And you shouldn't just finish your doctoral program and say, hello world, I'm here, come hire me because I'm wonderful. But it's how you have enhanced your capability through that network over time. And you know, the thing that I found after many years in higher education is that we are part of an incredible community that does want to connect and share. And so that's one of the advantages we have as we're thinking about this. And I also love Zalima's thought on, you know, maybe looking at opportunities that we might not have thought about even 3 months ago, because I think that's going to have to be part of our strategy moving forward.
Yeah. Final question. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty, but are you all hopeful that we may be able to use this as an opportunity to really, I think, boldly increase our efforts, particularly as it relates to diversify faculty and staff and retaining those individuals? Dr. Valdez?
I think fewer job searches going on means that there is going to be bigger pools, and with bigger pools comes more diversity. I think that is absolutely an opportunity, and that's why I would like to stress again, don't just have 3 interviews, have 8. Make sure that there's a deep, diverse pool so that you can go in deep and get those candidates that are excellent, that you may have just made the cut, bring them out. You don't know, you might really like them when they're in there, or they might really align with the fit of your program in a way that you hadn't anticipated. And it gives an opportunity there. So I definitely think that there's opportunities. There's also opportunities for retention. I mean, because maybe someone really wants to leave right now. Guess what? The economy blew up. So you might be stuck for a couple of years, but it also gives your university a chance to try to make things better for you, make things right for you. We are doing more preemptive retentions than we ever have before at UC Merced. I am really excited about that, very pleased by that. I would also say that if you are unsatisfied with the conversation that you're having with your chair in terms of a retention offer, you need to find a way politely to go talk to your dean. And if the dean isn't giving you the kind of the response that you need to politely ask if it's okay for you to take a meeting with your chief diversity officer. You have to advocate for yourself in multiple offices of administration in order to encourage that retention offer that you deserve, that you get.
Yeah, Dr. Pratt-Clark, did you want to quickly chime in before we're out of time?
Yeah, no, I'm a hopeful person, so I remain hopeful. I think it's going to be important for universities to be very strategic and actually to think more about identifying talent and using search waivers, because it'll become a very competitive market. And you know, the talent that we're seeking to attract, other institutions will be seeking to attract that talent as well.
Thank you. And Andy?
I'm going to take a very different view. One of the things, we focus primarily on faculty, but it's so critically important for us to also focus on the heroic work of our frontline staff, many of whom have been required to come to campus and have been fearful about coming to campus, the often overlooked part of our population. So as we're talking about retention, we're talking about building community. That heroic work that is happening right now should be front and center for all of us as part of our call to action in terms of acknowledging that. The last thing, and I know we're out of time, is grace. We have to be willing to give grace to others, because we're all stressed right now, and grace to ourselves, because this is also a difficult time for us, and being willing and able to do that is so important now more than ever.
Great, well done and nicely said. Thank you, our panel. I'm going to turn it over to Wendy. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. What a great discussion. We really appreciate your time and joining us today. You can view past Diverse Talk Live webcasts on our website, so I wanted to point that out. Also, to stay abreast of the latest diversity and inclusion news in higher education, please sign up for our newsletters and subscribe for our magazine, which includes a DigiMag. So please visit diverseeducation.com. And again, thank you so much, panelists, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for spending the afternoon for this hour-long discussion. And we hope to see you on a future webcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.